Hello again, everybody, and welcome to CaneSport's Countdown to Kickoff. It's a new season, and game day is here. And the Miami Hurricanes are getting ready to travel to Atlanta to play the number one ranked Alabama Crimson Tide, the defending national champions. The game that you couldn't draw up better to start a new football season because of the excitement that it's bringing. I'm Gary Ferman, the publisher of CaneSport.com, joined by Tony Tsoukalas, who's helped us so much this offseason with information on the Alabama Crimson Tide, and nobody covers it better than Tony at BamaInsider.com. And Tony, the buildup has obviously been enormous, at least on the Miami side. How has it been on the Alabama side? Has it just been another game day for them?
I think it's a little bit of an excitement just because, it's the opener, right? So there's a lot of anticipation, and it's going to be in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. It's, the end of an era for Alabama too, because they've had so many of these neutral site games, and moving forward, they're going to do more of the home on home kind of game. So this is the last one where Alabama, or it could be the last one where Alabama plays a big time opponent in a neutral site. But as far as like Miami's concerned, I don't necessarily think the Alabama fan base is too worried about Miami. I think, there's a respect for D'Eriq King and all he can do at the quarterback position. And when you look at some of the quarterbacks that have beaten Alabama in the past, they've sometimes looked a lot like what D'Eriq King can do. But I think when, you look from an Alabama factor, that they're not, I'm not necessarily speaking for the team, but, the fan base, it doesn't seem like they're too concerned about coming away with a win on Saturday.
Well, I know who is concerned, and I think that's the 17 players on Alabama's roster that are from the state of Florida. And, that's why Nick Saban scheduled this game. I think he scheduled it for them. I think he scheduled it because of the recruiting that Alabama does in the state of Florida. Let's be honest, they've turned Florida into a major part of their recruiting base, have gotten endless top players from South Florida and above for at least the past decade now. So this gives them an even added showcase in the state of Florida. They're continuing to obviously recruit in this area. I'm kind of surprised what you're saying about not beginning the seasons with these neutral site games in Atlanta, because they've gone so well for Bama. So my next question to you is, what does Bama do so well in the off season that allows them to show up ready to go on opening day?
Well, first of all, let's you mentioned the recruiting, and that's something I always bring up. I mean, as great as Alabama's process is, and as great as their coaching is, they're bringing in the best talent. So when they're losing, 6 first rounders, they're replacing those guys with 4 and 5-star talent. So it makes that transition a lot easier. But you can't ignore Nick Saban's process, how he's gotten his, players, kind of focused in on, the day-to-day and not really worried about anything but improvement. You've also got the it sounds cliche, but the iron sharpens iron, so you've got these good players playing against other great players during the offseason. It really gets them ready to face big time competition in big time games. So all that kind of put together, that's the reason why Alabama is so successful in openers, and all the focus is there at the beginning of the season. It's easy to get, amped up and your focus straight at the beginning of the season. It's that grind in the middle that, sometimes we'll get to Alabama.
Well, they're 19-point favorites in this game right now. And some of the people that I've spoken to this week that are kind of not non-biased think that might be a few points too many. We'll see how it plays out on Saturday. I mean, it's a comfortable spread for a number 1 versus number 14 game. But I think people respect, like what you said, the Nick Saban process and the way he's able to reload. So in the conversations that you've been hearing this week, does anybody on Miami concern them? I got to think they're going to be aware of D'Eriq King. I got to think that at the beginning of the game, they're going to want to look at his mobility and see, is he really fully back from the ACL surgery? But has there been any conversation at all up there about aspects of Miami's game and Miami's schemes that pose a concern to the coaching staff?
It's mostly centered around D'Eriq King, because like I said, like that's the kind of quarterback that, if you want a blueprint of, how teams have beaten Alabama in the past, it's been with a mobile quarterback. So if he's able to move in the way that, he's capable of, who knows, maybe he can unsettle Alabama early in the game, and, maybe Miami gets the bounces they need. But there hasn't been too much talk or too much concern, I guess, about what Miami has to offer. I mean, I know they're aggressive with their cornerback play. Nick Saban talked a little bit about that the other day. So I think there's a respect for what Miami has. I mean, really experienced offensive line. Those things have been brought up, but as far as maybe a concern, I don't know if it's necessarily there.
All right, so the one thing we do know is Miami does have some weapons on offense, led by King, and Rhett Lashley at times can dial it up pretty good. I think the Miami fan base is looking for even more consistency from him this year. There were times last year, particularly when the level of competition got elevated, that Miami didn't do as well offensively as it did at other times. But the one thing I noticed when I looked at Alabama extensively was that teams with these type of wide open offenses did give them some trouble last year. You look at the Ole Miss game, the Florida game, even Georgia, I thought was able to do some decent things against Alabama at times. So like teams that can throw the football effectively can hurt you with formations, with schemes, can isolate your linebackers in single coverage. Tended to give Alabama some problems, and I think that's Miami's calling card in this game. They're not going to win a slugfest. I mean, Miami's going to have to score points. They're obviously going to have to get breaks, but the offense is going to have to be able to string enough plays together to put points on the board. And you obviously were at all those Alabama games last year. What did you feel that those teams I mentioned were able to do so effectively to move the ball against obviously a very good Bama defense, good enough to win the national title?
Yeah, one of those things was, like you said, isolating those linebackers in coverage. I mean, Alabama struggled against tight ends. Kenny Yeboah with Ole Miss. Obviously with Kyle Pitts against Florida. There's a few other times where they really struggled to guard tight ends or quality tight ends. So that's an area, if you can kind of get those, maybe get some miscommunication in coverage. Do some eye candy before the play, kind of get people confused, and maybe take advantage of that, and kind of feast on a breakdown in coverage. Teams were able to do that at times against Alabama. You saw that a lot in the Ole Miss game, where things were just broken down, and for a while they just couldn't get a stop against the Rebels. So and that's a pretty wide open offense, like you said. If Miami can do anything like that, then they can get into a shootout with Alabama. And look, it's going to be harder to get into that kind of shootout because I think Alabama's defense has gotten substantially better. I think this will be one of the better defenses in the nation. But if you're able to confuse it, you'd have to think that Alabama's offense is taking at least a little bit of a step back, at least early. So when you look at that, if you're able to put points up on this defense, you might be able to get into a shootout. I think it's going to be a lot tougher than it was last season, but if you're looking at a blueprint, you kind of hit it on the nail right there. Is just kind of maybe try to get some of these linebackers out in coverage.
Well, that's what I see, and that's where Will Mallory comes into play for Miami. He's a tight end that they feel very good about. He's experienced. He's gotten faster in the offseason, and he's really made a surge here in the last week of practice, and seems to be running faster. And I think sometimes some guys take a few weeks to get into football shape when training camp begins. Will Mallory has been doing the best that he's been doing this fall in the last week of practice. I think he's a big factor in this game. I think Miami's got to look for him a lot and try to isolate him on those linebackers. And, particularly you look at like a Christian Harris, and I know they went out and got Henry Tutu from Tennessee, but when you watch Henry Tutu last year at Tennessee, he had similar problems defending in the passing game. So that to me is the one spot where Miami has to find an edge and has to find a way to be dominant in those individual matchups against those linebackers. And that'll involve Mallory. And I imagine it'll also involve the running backs, Cam Harris, Don Chaney. They're going to have to be factors in the passing game for Miami to be effective on offense. Because I know Miami likes their first five on the offensive line. I'm not sure how effective they're going to be able to be against Alabama's 3-4 front that is very stout, very good, and very now experienced. So that'll be interesting. All right, go ahead.
Yeah. Any way to spread out the game, right? So swing passes, wheel routes. You mentioned the running backs. Anything to you don't want to go right up the middle with this Alabama front seven. It's too quality. It's going to beat you. So anything that you can do to kind of get them out in space, mean, they're still athletic, but you're right. Yeah, and that's their best option of really attacking.
All right, so they play a 3-4 defense, and a guy that everybody agrees Miami's going to have to deal with is Will Anderson. He's not a true defensive end. He's an outside linebacker in Alabama's schemes. Many believe that with Kayvon Thibodeau of Oregon, that he's one of the best. He's among the best 2 or 3 pass rushers in the country. Do they move him around? Does he come from different places? Tell us a little bit about Will Anderson and what Miami will be dealing with trying to control him.
Yeah, Alabama's base package is a 3-4, but that's kind of on paper, right? Because most teams are, especially like a Miami, if you're going to try to spread Alabama out, I think the majority of the time they'll be out of the nickel. So that almost looks like a 4-2 because you're going to have 2 defensive linemen, probably an end and a tackle kind of moved in to play tackle, and you might have Chris Allen and Will Anderson on the outsides. They might be standing, they might have their hand in the dirt, but they're essentially at that point defensive ends. Then you usually have the 2 linebackers behind them, and then 5 cornerbacks behind them, or 5 defensive backs behind them. That's probably what the formation is going to look like most of the time. Sometimes Alabama will take out one of those linebackers and put in another defensive back out of the dime. But Will Anderson, I think, he's only a sophomore, but I think he'd be a top 10 pick this year if he was able to come out. He's elite. He's probably, I want to see him for, a full season producing the way he was in the second half, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's the best player that on defense that Nick Saban's ever coached. And that's saying a lot, but I have extremely high expectations for this kid. He's really fun to watch, and he gets in the backfield in a hurry. He led all freshmen in sacks last year. He won the Sean Alexander Award, which is given to the top freshman. He's a serious talent, and he's a grown man as a sophomore. And then you have Chris Allen on the other side, who led the SEC in tackles for a loss. He could set the edge. He can also get to the passer as well. Then you talk about Henry TuaTo'o and Chris Harris up the middle. That's a really tough front 7 or whatever it's going to be, a front 6. It doesn't matter. Alabama is going to be pretty stout at linebacker and defensive line.
All right, so if Miami's going to move the ball, I think we identified the way they're going to need to do it. The secondary is solid. Nick Saban does a great job coaching those guys. The other angle that I saw for Miami in this game goes in reverse, and that's the Miami defense against Bryce Young. And Miami's only real chance to still be in this game in the fourth quarter, I think, is if they can get in Bryce Young's head. And they got to figure out ways to speed the game up on him, to rattle him, to make him nervous, to make him look like a young quarterback who has not been on this stage before. And the way that I expect Miami to do that is I'm looking for a lot of stunting at the line of scrimmage. I think that they're going to try to figure out ways that they can, get up the middle and hit certain gaps and things like that. Use their speed on defense. They're loading up with speed at the linebacker positions as opposed to size. If it doesn't work, they're going to get steamrolled because you've got 210-pound guys going against 330-pound athletic players on the offensive front for Alabama, and it could get ugly if their schemes don't work. I think they're going to blitz a lot. I think Manny Diaz is going to take a lot of chances. So my question is, what you've seen from and heard of Bryce Young, how ready do you feel he is for this first test?
I think he's extremely ready. It says a lot that Alabama, despite not having a returning starter, didn't have a quarterback competition this year. It was pretty much handed to Bryce Young. That's how confident they were in him. He's a guy that he might be stepping into his first season as a starter, and that always comes with some uncertainties and some growing pains to a certain extent. But he's a guy that's been here and done that. At least on the high school level. I mean, he replaced JT Daniels at Mater Dei High School in California. He had all the pressure on the world with him doing that. And his first season, he won a national championship over there. So he's set records. He's obviously shown what he can do at the high school level. It's kind of hard to judge him at the college level because he really didn't get a lot of opportunities. It's an extremely small sample size, but he seems composed. Everything we've heard, throughout the offseason is that, the team has full confidence in him. So I have to think that he's ready for this opportunity.
All right, tell us about Bill O'Brien, his adjustment back to college football. will that take a quarter, a half? Will it not be a factor at all? Your thoughts on that?
When we talked to Bill, he mentioned, and this is a popular theme whenever Alabama cycles through so many coordinators. Um, it's Nick Saban's offense, it's Alabama's offense, so I don't expect it to change too much, And I think really what Bill O'Brien's going to do is just, I think over the offseason, we haven't gotten to see Alabama, so I can't really tell you exactly how it's going to look, but I'm sure he's gotten a good feel of what Bryce Young is comfortable with and what the strengths are to his defense, or of his offense rather. And I think they're just going to play to that. And so, I think depending on how Bryce comes out, I think that will probably determine how open Alabama, how much Alabama opens things up on offense. I think if Bryce might struggle, I think that, maybe Bill O'Brien leans on his line and his really strong stable of running backs and tries to overpower Miami the way that, UNC did last year. You know what I'm saying? Really just try to run it down their throats. But if he feels like he can exploit with Bryce Young and use some of the dual threat abilities with Bryce and he's hitting the wide receivers, they certainly have the power to do that as well. So I think it's just going to predicate when you're looking at it from a Miami standpoint. I think it's really essential to kind of stop Alabama on those first few drives, because if you allow Bryce Young to get into a rhythm and you allow Alabama to be multidimensional, it's going to be harder and harder to stop throughout the game.
Yeah, and I think Miami in the games where they played the worst last year was outscored something like 50-3 in the first quarter. So first quarters have not gone well for them. That's when schemes come into play. Coaches work the whole off season, and then when the season starts, to get ready for what they're going to do at the beginning of games. And then, of course, the onus is on making adjustments and things like that. But Miami's going to have to come out more ready to play from the opening kickoff, no question. Now, would you say Alabama is better offensively running the ball right now or throwing the ball?
It depends on how the offensive line gels. I think when you look at the stable of running backs and then just everything they're replacing in the passing game, you'd have to lean on the running game. I mean, they've got Brian Robinson, who's the fifth-year senior, but they've also got Trey Sanders, a former 5-star. He's back from a season-ending hip injury. They've got Jason McClellan, who a lot of people think's the best back in that room. He's a sophomore, had averaged 10 yards a carry last year, hit off a couple big runs. And then you also got Roydell Williams and Kamar Wheaton's the top back in this year's class. So 5 just excellent backs. You look at the offensive line, it's still gelling. I think it's now finally back to 100% health, but it's been missing a part here and a part there all off season. So they haven't really had a chance to play with their best 5, and get those extended reps at least with their top 5. So depending on how solid that offensive line is, I think it could definitely be running. If not, they do have the weapons to beat you in the passing game, but I think that's going to probably take more time to develop as the season goes on.
All right, we're used to seeing great running backs at Bama. They've just been reloading them every single year for the past many years. This year, at least it has sounded like it's going to be a little bit more running back by committee. Bring us up to speed on where Alabama stands at the running back position coming into the season.
Yeah, Brian Robinson's the starter on the depth chart, and that's what you would expect from a fifth-year senior. He took advantage of that Blake eligibility rule and returned for an extra season. That being said, there's not that bell cow back, like you said. There's not that Najee Harris kind of guy. Jason McClellan's a guy that's been really exciting this fall. And I'm expecting big things from him. The mystery of the group is Trey Sanders, who was, the most talented of these guys coming out of high school, but it, broke his foot his freshman year, then got in a car accident and, had a serious hip injury last year. And now he's back to full strength, but let's see what he's able to do. Is he going to be able to be the 5-star Trey Sanders that we saw out of IMG? According to, sources at practice, he's looked very, very good, but I want to see it in games, and I want to see how Alabama is going to use it. I think probably the top 3 that they're going to filter out are those 3. It's going to be, Brian Robinson, Jace McClellan, and Trey Sanders. And each one of those guys is maybe a little bit different. Brian Robinson's more the power guy. Jason McClellan can, obviously last year he showed you he could hit some big plays, some home runs. And I like Trey Sanders catching out of the backfield. I think if you're trying to ease him into that rotation coming out of the injury, I think third down's a great spot to do it, because he's a guy that, he can be a power guy, but he can also, be kind of that change of pace guy, and he catches really well out of the backfield. So I just think some combination of those three is what I'm expecting, at least.
All right, Alabama begins the season #1. Different people have different opinions. Does this look like another national championship team to you?
It is, but it's so hard to repeat, So I think it comes down to the mental aspect. Are they going to be able to avoid complacency? Like, look at, history would say that it's not going to be a national championship team, just because A, they lost a lot, but also B, it's just teams don't repeat.
Very
I mean,
tough.
Alabama did, but maybe like a decade ago, it's just, it doesn't happen very often. And that's because of how hard, not only from a, athletic standpoint and a competition standpoint, but also a complacency standpoint. And that's why you've seen Nick Saban kind of hammer home some of these leadership things. That's why he's upset with his star tight end right now, Jaleel Billingsley, who he doesn't feel like has totally bought into the program right now. It's because he knows that this thing can unravel really quickly, and it doesn't matter. I mean, you look at, Alabama the year after they beat Georgia in the national championship game. I thought that team with Tua Tagovailoa and Jerry Jeudy and, Henry Ruggs and, all those big time guys, they got killed by Clemson in the final, and then the championship game. And it's because they even admitted that, they let it get to their heads. They got a little complacent. They got away from that Bama factor that they've talked about. So let's see if they're, able to kind of learn from those past mistakes and put together, a championship level team. They've got championship level talent, but there's a few teams in the nation that has championship level talent. I would say Georgia has it. I would say, Clemson has it. Ohio State probably has it. So it's going to be more of a mental thing to me than it is going to be an athletic thing.
All right, well, one guy I know that doesn't get complacent, and that's Nick Saban, and that's why he might be the best that's ever done it in college football. So just a golden opportunity for Miami. I don't think anybody expects Miami to win this game. If they're even competitive into the fourth quarter, I think it's a win for the Hurricanes. I can't believe I'm saying that, but I really think it's true. I don't believe in them. I'm not a believer in moral victories, but I think in this particular game, in these circumstances, I think if Miami's able to keep it respectable and be competitive, just be competitive, which they haven't been in their bigger games in the past few seasons. So be competitive, hang in there, try to be in the game in the fourth quarter. And I think if that's the case, I think Miami fans would walk out of there, happy with the opener and look forward to the rest of the season. So it's going to be a big day, Tony. Thank you so much for all your help in giving us some insight into the Crimson Tide. Thank you for your help during the off season. Looking forward to seeing you at the game on Saturday. It's a new season, and that's always exciting, no matter who your team is. So for Tony Tsoukalas from BamaInsider.com, I'm Gary Ferman. Thank you for joining us on CaneSport's Countdown to Kickoff. We'll see you next time, everybody.